Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm looking forward to today's quick overview around the region for each other. Just so we keep abreast, obviously, I'm very concerned, Bhargav and Uday, that you're doing okay psychologically after getting absolutely hammered last night by the Pakistanis in the T20 World Cup. So hopefully you'll be able to remain focused. Just quickly, guys, Southeast Asia today, we had one assessed event and 21 other developments. We'll cover off on a couple of the major ones. We'll also zip through the other regions. North Asia, we had 10 other developments. Australia and the Pacific Islands, 12 other developments. South Asia, which I believe you'll be covering off on today, Uday had one assessed event and 18 other developments. And EMEA had one assessed event and 34 other developments. So whilst we've got about 60 or 70 issues there, we're just going to cover off some of the main ones in Asia Pacific and EMEA. In my sub-region today, there was a protest in Bangkok. Basically, it was the Talufa group, which called for a gathering outside the Bangkok South Criminal Court. We're expecting dozens to several hundred people. Of course, they met yesterday also to call the rally for today. Also in Thailand, the Foreign Affairs Ministry announced that the Thailand Pass will replace the certificate of entry, and that will commence on the 1st of November. So they're reopening on the 1st of November. Obviously, travellers won't be able to get approval on the 1st of November, and everyone will be actually sitting back and waiting for the new system to start, because it is a little easier than the world's most convoluted certificate of entry requirement to get into Thailand. Also, the nighttime curfews imposed in Bangkok and 17 other provinces will be lifted on October 31. There's a lot of ambiguity there too, where they haven't actually released enough flexibility and enough stipulations of the regulations to get the nightlife fully going. They're talking about curfews, but curfews don't really help tourists by being lifted if bars and restaurants and nightlife and entertainment centres are closed. Also, there's been a lot of dams. 15 provinces remain flooded in Thailand, so there's an anticipation of another storm this week. And basically, there's a lot of major dams being opened to discharge water, which is going to contribute to downstream flooding. In Indonesia, the Central Java Governor, Ganja Pranowo, yesterday told residents who live in the mountainous areas to expect earthquakes. Whilst earthquakes aren't getting more common as a common belief, they are actually starting to try and educate their people about what does the ring of fire and tectonic plates mean to where you're living. Also, the Chinese vessel, the Haiyangdi, has basically been hovering around the Natuna Sea, and most of the world's saying, well, that's not significant. Well, it is significant. It's significant indeed because of the Chinese expansionism efforts. They're not just there conducting surveys because they're awfully concerned international citizens about others having resources. There was also a clash broke out in southern Sulawesi and Makassar yesterday, and also in Papua, the police chief, General Listio Sigit Prabowo, told military and police forces to remain on high alert until the end of the year, which is a classic piece of hypocrisy, given they've created and had dramas there for 50 odd years now, and they're going to just remain on alert. And as they always do, they always say after every major incident, it's okay, we're going to beef up security. Now they just need to be alert for another couple of months. The 50 years prior doesn't indicate anything moving forward could sense that perhaps after Christmas you should look at some security. There was also a caravan aircraft crashed in Ilaga in the Highlands today. That's right up in the Highlands at an altitude of 2,700 feet, but to get there, there's a lot of clouds and a lot of higher peaks to get through, so there's often accidents there, and there's often the repeat of poorly skilled pilots, poorly skilled crews, pressures to fly when the weather's clearly a gamble. And Ilaga is a notable memory in my experiences in Papua for most fences and crossings of drains and bridges, and even some house walls are all made out of fuselages. There's a lot more happening in Malaysia, in Myanmar, in Timor-Leste, Vietnam, but I'll pass it off there. People can join us as members if they need to drill in on things that will impact them more. So whoever wants to go next, Uday or Basil, sing out.
Sure, I'll go ahead, Paul. So if we jump over to South Asia for a second now. In Bangladesh, the recent communal tensions continue to manifest in unrest. There have been protests, clashes, and more violence. And it's a sensitive time ahead because some major Hindu festivals are coming up at the start of November. So the security situation is quite volatile, and there could be the potential for it to spill over to India.
Yep, thanks.
Yep. So meanwhile, in Pakistan, the notorious Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan has reared its head again. Last week, there was violence at a sit-in protest in Lahore, which resulted in the deaths of security forces and protesters. And there have been protests in Karachi and other parts of Pakistan too. They're demanding the release of their leader, who was arrested after organizing violent, disruptive nationwide protests in April. And lastly, if we jump over to Afghanistan quickly, the Islamic State claimed responsibility for an attack on a power pylon that disrupted electricity to Kabul and other areas last week. Now, what's interesting is because this was a very infamous Taliban tactic during the insurgency. So it's interesting to see how it's going. And meanwhile, there's armed and political resistance groups that are forming against the Taliban's rule. So it still is a very volatile situation and looks like it's going to continue devolving. I think that's it from South Asia, Paul.
Thanks, Uday. Bhargav, did you want to contribute or Basil? Go ahead.
Well, it is quite interesting that within Pakistan, there have been factions, Islamist factions, which have opposed the current incumbent government of Imran Khan. And more interestingly, these Islamist factions are allegedly pro-Taliban. Now, how does that work in the internal political dynamics when Pakistan is in a very tricky situation, when they claim that they're against any terror activities and they are for peaceful resolution, but at the same time, some of the Islamist parties do openly support and call for recognition of Taliban government, despite government's hesitance in doing so. So it's a very tricky situation for Pakistan within the government as well as the political parties. So there's something to keep a very close eye on.
I think the ambiguities around when we refer to Pakistan with the pronoun like they, the reality is there's government, there's tribal, there's so much complexity, there's so many historical issues, there's so many allegiances that were born long before borders were constructed by others. So I think we need to always be very cognizant, not just in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Central Asia, Africa, but also in Southeast Asia, how important the complexity of tribalism is. And so many multinational companies are getting fooled by local partners and by governments professing invest in our country. It's so wonderful, it's awesome. They always admit the issues of tribalism, ambiguity of multi-levels of government, the horrible nature of narcissistic corruption and nepotism. And I guess a lot of companies, like you hear some of our esteemed risk advisor clients talk about it. Oh, look, we don't need analysis. We've got BBC. Well, today our 10 analysts covered 80 issues. I wish that I had the talent to be able to do the work of 10 analysts and cover off those 80 issues whilst doing a regional or a global role. That would be magnificent. And I think that's because a lot of them miss the complexities, perhaps miss value that they could offer to their clients, to their companies, if they had a little bit more awareness of the real risks and the real nature out there of things that can impact them. Basil, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. I'll be covering two issues in the EMEA region, mainly in Africa. First, the political turmoil in Sudan is continuing. There have been demonstrations between pro-military supporters and pro-civilian supporters. The dispute is split between two factions. Some of the people, or some of the public, I should say, is supporting a military transition in the country. However, the other faction is supporting a civilian transition. During the weekend, the pro-military supporters staged demonstrations. They blocked roads. They blocked the main bridge that goes from Bahri town to the capital, Khartoum, which blocked a lot of business activities and it had some supply chain disruptions. At the same time, we have the U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, in the country, trying to solve the dispute between the military and civilian problems. At the same time, the pro-military demonstrators attacked the state-run news agency yesterday, and they burned tires in front of the building. Today, there was quite a significant development in the country, and internet services were suspended by the military rulers. At the same time, 4 members of the cabinet of the civilian government were arrested, and at the same time, the Prime Minister Abdullah Al-Hamdouk was put under house arrest. Another development I'll be talking about is Nigeria. Nigeria has been in a turmoil since like 10 years from now, but at the same time, this turmoil has resulted in major security problems. One of these security problems is the escape of inmates. Around 837 inmates escaped a custodial center in Oyo State, which is close to the business hub of Lagos. At the same time, the Nigerian Correctional Service issued search patrols to recapture those inmates. Around 262 were recaptured, although 575 are still missing. That's it for me.
Okay, thanks. And Bhargav, we won't cover off all of EMEA, given of the 90 odd events today, it had 34 of them, but if you could maybe just recap some of the key issues in Europe.
Certainly, Paul. Well, the global energy crisis hitting Europe is pretty hard, actually. In Italy and in France, there were protests over the weekend. In Italy, taxi services were disrupted, with labor unions calling for protests, especially in major cities like Rome, Milan, and Turin. And France, it is similar, but there the major issue was COVID-19 restrictions, especially compulsory vaccination issues, which actually led to some protests in Paris, Marseille, Lille, and Amiens. Now, the compulsory vaccination issue has been a boiling point. It has come to a boiling point in several countries, especially the US and in France. France value their liberty a lot. Even the emergency service workers, despite the mandatory vaccination ruling by the government, the emergency workers have been very hesitant, and they have openly protested such a ruling. At the same time, in Germany, the government has tightened COVID-19 restrictions for travelers coming in from 5 countries, including Bulgaria, Croatia, surprisingly Singapore, Cameroon, and Democratic Republic of Congo. Travelers from these countries will have to quarantine for 10 days upon arrival into Germany. That's pretty much it, Paul, from Europe.
Okay, great. Well, look, I think we can stop the recording now, Bhargav, and I'll get you all to stay on.